Empires rose. Empires fell. But their stories still shape our world. Welcome to Erased Empires, where history comes alive through forgotten tales. Like, comment, and subscribe. Your journey through time begins now. In 27 BC, a young man stood before the Roman Senate. His name was Octavian. He was 36 years old. He had just won a civil war that had lasted on and off for nearly 20 years. He controlled all of Rome's armies. He controlled all of Rome's provinces. He had more power than any Roman in history. And now he did something unexpected. He gave it all back. Octavian announced to the Senate that he was restoring the Republic. He was returning all his powers to the Senate and the people of Rome. After years of dictatorship and civil war, the Republic would be free again. The senators were stunned. Then they panicked. Without Octavian in charge, who would govern the empire? Who would command the armies? Who would keep the peace? The senators begged Octavian to reconsider. They pleaded with him to continue leading Rome. Reluctantly, or so it seemed, Octavian agreed. The Senate granted him a special position. They gave him control of the most important provinces, the ones with armies. They gave him authority to make war and peace. They gave him the power to veto any law. And they gave him a new name, Augustus. It means the revered one, the illustrious one. It suggested something almost divine. From this moment, Octavian would be known as Augustus. And this moment marks the beginning of the Roman Empire. But here's the interesting part. It was all theater. Augustus never actually gave up power. The whole scene in the Senate was carefully staged. He returned powers he didn't need and kept the powers that mattered. The Republic was officially restored. But in reality, one man ruled Rome. This was Augustus's genius. He learned from Julius Caesar's mistake. Caesar had made his power too obvious. He accepted titles that sounded like kingship. He made senators feel humiliated. And so they killed him. Augustus would be smarter. He would rule as an emperor, but he would pretend to be just a citizen. He would hold absolute power, but hide it behind republican forms. Let me explain how Augustus did this. Augustus never called himself emperor or king. He took the title princeps, first citizen. Just a regular citizen who happened to be first among equals. He held various official positions. He was consul sometimes. He was tribune. He held imperium, military command. But he rotated through these positions legally. He never claimed to be above the law. The Senate continued to meet. Elections continued to be held. The old republican offices still existed. Consuls, praetors, aediles. All the familiar machinery of the Republic kept running. But Augustus controlled it all from behind the scenes. He recommended candidates for office, and his recommendations were always accepted. He guided the Senate's decisions. He held the real military power because he controlled the armies. It was a constitutional monarchy disguised as a republic. And it worked brilliantly. Augustus ruled for 41 years. That's longer than most Romans had been alive when he died. An entire generation grew up knowing only Augustus as leader. And slowly, Romans stopped thinking of Augustus as temporary. They stopped expecting the Republic to return. This was just how things were now. But Augustus didn't just maintain power cleverly. He also used it well. He transformed Rome and brought an era of peace and prosperity that would last 2 centuries. Let me tell you about what Augustus accomplished. First, he ended the civil wars. For 100 years, Rome had been tearing itself apart. Romans fighting Romans. Armies marching on Rome. Proscriptions and murders. Augustus ended all that. He was the last man standing. There were no more rivals. No more competing generals. The wars were over. This alone was an enormous achievement. Romans were exhausted from decades of violence. They craved stability more than liberty. Augustus gave them stability. Second, Augustus reformed the army. This was crucial. The army had destroyed the republic. Generals with loyal armies had become more powerful than the state. Augustus made the army loyal to him personally, but in a systematic way. He reorganized the legions. He set fixed terms of service. Soldiers served for 20 years, then received a pension and land when they retired. This was important. Before, soldiers depended on their generals to give them land. This made them loyal to individuals. Now they knew they would be taken care of by the system. This created institutional loyalty. Augustus also stationed most legions on the frontiers, far from Italy. Legions were spread out. No general could easily gather multiple legions for a coup. And Augustus created a new force, the Praetorian Guard. This was an elite unit stationed in Italy to protect the emperor. They were well paid and loyal. They also served as a counterweight to the legions. The military reforms worked. For 2 centuries, there would be no major civil wars. The army remained under control. Third, Augustus reformed the government administration. The Roman state had grown huge. It ruled 50 million people across the Mediterranean. But the old republican system was designed for a city-state. Augustus created a professional bureaucracy. He appointed officials to run different departments: finance, grain supply, roads, aqueducts. These officials served at his pleasure and reported to him. He divided provinces into 2 types. Senatorial provinces were peaceful and governed by the Senate. Imperial provinces had armies and were governed by Augustus's appointees. This created an efficient administration. The empire could be governed more effectively than before. Fourth, Augustus reformed Rome's finances. The civil wars had drained the treasury. Augustus stabilized the currency. He created new tax systems. He made sure provinces were taxed fairly, not plundered by corrupt governors. This made the empire wealthier and reduced rebellion. When taxation is predictable and reasonable, people accept it. When it's arbitrary and excessive, they revolt. Fifth, Augustus launched a massive building program. He famously said, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble." This wasn't just boasting. Augustus transformed Rome physically. He built temples, forums, basilicas, theaters, and aqueducts. He repaired roads. He improved the city's infrastructure. The Forum of Augustus, the Temple of Mars, the Arapaces, the Altar of Peace. These monuments proclaimed a message. Rome was eternal. Rome was glorious. And Augustus had made it so. But Augustus didn't just build in Rome. Throughout the empire, cities were rebuilt or founded. Roads connected them. The famous Roman roads, so well built that some still exist today. These roads served multiple purposes. They let armies move quickly. They facilitated trade. They connected the empire culturally. Ideas, goods, and people could move freely. Sixth, Augustus promoted Roman culture and values. He tried to revive what he saw as traditional Roman morality. He passed laws to encourage marriage and childbearing among citizens. He restricted divorce. He promoted traditional family values. He patronized poets and artists. The Augustan age produced some of Rome's greatest literature. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, an epic poem that traced Rome's origins back to the Trojan hero Aeneas. It was propaganda, but magnificent propaganda. Horace, Ovid, Livy. These great writers flourished under Augustus's patronage. They celebrated Rome's past and present glory. Augustus also promoted the imperial cult. Not explicitly worshipping himself, that would seem too much like kingship, but he allowed the worship of Roma and Augustus together. In the provinces especially, temples were built to honor the goddess Roma and the divine Augustus. After Augustus died, the Senate officially declared him a god. From then on, deceased emperors were often deified. The living emperor was the son of a god. This gave the emperor religious authority alongside political power. 7th, Augustus established the empire's borders and defended them. He didn't launch massive new conquests like Caesar. Instead, he consolidated what Rome had and established defensible frontiers. In the north, the Rhine and Danube rivers became the border. Beyond them lived Germanic tribes that Augustus considered too difficult to conquer. After a disaster in Germany where 3 legions were ambushed and destroyed, Augustus pulled back. The empire would never again seriously try to conquer Germany. In the east, the Euphrates River roughly marked the border with Parthia. Rome and Parthia would be rivals for centuries, but they maintained an uneasy peace. In the south, the Sahara Desert formed a natural boundary. In the west, the Atlantic Ocean. These frontiers made sense. They were defensible. Rivers, deserts, and oceans are natural barriers. The empire could be protected without endless expansion. Augustus created the concept of a stable, defensible empire. Before, Rome had always been expanding, always conquering. Augustus said, "This is enough. Defend what we have." There was one exception: Britain. Augustus planned to invade Britain, but never got around to it. Later emperors would conquer part of Britain, but it would always be difficult and expensive to hold. By the time Augustus died in 14 AD, he had ruled for 41 years. He was 75 years old. He had transformed Rome completely. When he came to power, Rome was a war-torn republic. When he died, it was a stable empire. But there was a problem: succession. Augustus had no sons. He wanted to pass power to a family member, to keep power in his family. But his preferred heirs kept dying. First, his nephew Marcellus, who married Augustus's daughter Julia. Marcellus died young. Then Augustus's friend and general Agrippa married Julia. Agrippa died. Then Augustus adopted his grandsons, Julia's children. They both died young too. Finally, reluctantly, Augustus turned to his stepson Tiberius. Augustus had married Tiberius's mother Livia decades earlier. Tiberius was capable but cold. Augustus didn't particularly like him. But there was no one else. Augustus adopted Tiberius and made him co-ruler in his final years. When Augustus died, Tiberius smoothly took over as the second emperor. This established a precedent. Power would pass, usually within the imperial family. The Senate would formally grant powers to the new emperor, but in practice, the choice was made by the previous emperor or by the army. Rome was now a monarchy, though no one called it that. Tiberius ruled for 23 years. He was a competent administrator, but deeply unpopular. He was suspicious and paranoid. He eventually retired to the island of Capri and ruled from there, rarely visiting Rome. When Tiberius died, power passed to his grandnephew Gaius, known as Caligula. Caligula started well, but apparently went insane. He declared himself a god. He made his horse a consul. He murdered people on whims. After 4 years, his own guards assassinated him. Then came Claudius. Claudius was Caligula's uncle. He was sickly and stammered. People thought he was stupid. But Claudius proved to be a capable emperor. He conquered southern Britain. He reformed the administration. He ruled for 13 years. Claudius was possibly poisoned by his wife Agrippina. She wanted her son from a previous marriage to become emperor. That son was Nero. Nero became emperor at age 16. For the first 5 years, he was guided by good advisors and ruled well. But then Nero became increasingly tyrannical. He murdered his mother. He murdered his wife. He fancied himself an artist and forced senators to watch him perform. In 64 AD, a great fire destroyed much of Rome. Rumors spread that Nero had started it to clear land for a new palace. Nero blamed the Christians, a small religious sect, and persecuted them viciously. By 68 AD, Nero's rule had become intolerable. Army commanders rebelled. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy. Nero committed suicide. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. This was the family line descended from Augustus. Now there was no obvious heir. Different armies supported different generals. In 69 AD, the year of the four emperors, for different men claimed the throne. Civil war briefly returned. Finally, a general named Vespasian emerged victorious. Vespasian was from a middle-class family, not an aristocrat. But he had the army's support, and he proved to be an excellent emperor. Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian, formed the Flavian dynasty. They restored stability. Vespasian began building the Colosseum, Rome's famous amphitheater. Titus completed it. But Domitian, the second son, became increasingly tyrannical. He was assassinated in 96 AD. The Senate then did something clever. They chose an elderly, respected senator named Nerva to be emperor. Nerva had no sons. He adopted a capable general, Trajan, as his heir. This began the era of the five good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. These five emperors ruled from 96 AD to 180 AD. This was Rome's golden age. Each emperor adopted a capable successor rather than passing power to a biological son. This meant each new emperor was chosen for merit, not birth. Let me tell you about these emperors. In 235 AD, the Roman Emperor Alexander Severus was in his military camp on the Rhine frontier. He was 26 years old. He had ruled for 13 years. His soldiers surrounded him. They were angry. The emperor had tried to negotiate peace with Germanic tribes instead of fighting them. The soldiers wanted war and plunder. The soldiers attacked. They murdered Alexander Severus and his mother. Then they proclaimed their own choice as emperor: a tough soldier named Maximinus Thrax. This might seem like just another imperial assassination. Rome had seen emperors murdered before. But this event marked the beginning of something much worse. Over the next 50 years, Rome would have more than 50 men claimed to be emperor. Most would die violently. Armies would fight armies. Provinces would break away. The borders would collapse under invasion. The empire nearly died. This period is called the crisis of the 3rd century. And it shows us how even the mightiest empire can come to the brink of destruction. Let me take you back to where the crisis really began, with an emperor named Commodus. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, his son Commodus became emperor. Commodus was 19 years old, and he was everything his father was not. Marcus Aurelius had been wise, philosophical, dutiful. He spent years on the frontier fighting Rome's enemies, because that was his duty. Commodus was vain, cruel, and lazy. He had no interest in governing. He wanted pleasure and entertainment. Commodus believed he was the reincarnation of Hercules. He dressed in a lion's skin. He fought in the arena as a gladiator, which was scandalous. Gladiators were slaves and criminals. An emperor fighting like a slave was disgraceful. But Commodus forced senators to attend his performances. He made them cheer for him. Anyone who displeased him might be executed. Commodus left the actual governing to others. Various advisors and favorites ran the empire. Corruption flourished. The government became chaotic. After 13 years of misrule, a conspiracy formed. In 192 AD, Commodus was strangled in his bath by an assassin. The golden age of the five good emperors was over. What followed was chaos. 5 different men claimed the throne in quick succession. This period is called the Year of the Five Emperors. Eventually, a general named Septimius Severus emerged victorious. Severus was from North Africa. He was tough and capable. He restored order. But Severus also did something that would have long-term consequences. He dramatically increased the army's pay. He gave soldiers bonuses and gifts. He made it clear that the army's loyalty was what mattered most. On his deathbed in 211 AD, Severus gave his sons advice. He told them to enrich the soldiers and ignore everyone else. This created a problem. The emperor's power now clearly depended on the army's support. And the army knew it. Soldiers realized they could make and unmake emperors. If soldiers didn't like their emperor, they could kill him and choose a new one. And the new emperor would reward them for their support. This started a terrible cycle. Severus's sons, Caracalla and Geta, fought each other for power. Caracalla murdered his brother Geta, along with thousands of Geta's supporters. Caracalla ruled through fear and violence. Caracalla did do one significant thing. In 212 AD, he granted Roman citizenship to almost all free inhabitants of the empire. This was a huge expansion of citizenship. But Caracalla probably did this to increase tax revenue. Citizens paid certain taxes that non-citizens didn't. More citizens meant more tax money to pay the soldiers. In 217 AD, Caracalla was assassinated by one of his own soldiers while urinating on the side of the road. That's how the great-grandson of Marcus Aurelius died. After Caracalla came a series of emperors from the Severan family. They were increasingly weak and controlled by powerful women and military strongmen. The last Severan emperor was Alexander Severus, whose murder in 235 AD started the real crisis. What followed was 50 years of almost continuous chaos. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century. Let me explain what happened. The empire faced multiple disasters all at the same time. First, there was the problem of imperial succession. Between 235 and 284 AD, there were at least 50 men who claimed to be emperor. Some ruled for years. Some ruled for months. Some ruled for just weeks or days. Most died violently. Murdered by their own soldiers. Killed in battle against rival emperors. Assassinated by conspirators. The army divided into factions. Different legions supported different candidates. Civil wars erupted constantly. Roman armies fought each other, while foreign enemies invaded. Second, the frontiers collapsed. Rome's enemies saw the empire's weakness and attacked. In the north, Germanic tribes poured across the Rhine and Danube rivers. The Goths, the Alemanni, the Franks. They raided deep into Roman territory. They sacked cities. They carried off plunder and captives. In 251 AD, the Emperor Decius was killed fighting the Goths. An entire Roman army was destroyed. This was the first time a Roman emperor had been killed in battle against barbarians in centuries. The invasions continued. In 260 AD, Germanic tribes reached northern Italy. Rome itself was threatened for the first time in centuries. Third, the eastern frontier collapsed. Rome's old rival Parthia had been replaced by a new, more aggressive power. The Sassanid Persian Empire. The Sassanids were powerful and well organized. They wanted to reclaim territories that had once belonged to the old Persian Empire centuries before. In the 240s and 250s, the Sassanids invaded Roman territory repeatedly. They captured cities in Syria and Mesopotamia. Then, in 260 AD, something unthinkable happened. The Roman Emperor Valerian was campaigning against the Persians. In a battle near Edessa, the Roman army was defeated, and Emperor Valerian was captured alive. This had never happened before. A Roman emperor captured by a foreign enemy. The Persian king Shapur humiliated Valerian. According to some accounts, he used Valerian as a footstool to mount his horse. When Valerian died in captivity, Shapur supposedly had his skin stuffed and displayed as a trophy. Whether these stories are true or exaggerated, the message was clear. Rome's invincibility was shattered. Even the emperor could be defeated and humiliated. Fourth, the empire began to fragment. Provinces broke away under local leaders. In the west, a Roman general named Postumus declared himself emperor of Gaul, Britain, and Spain. This breakaway state is called the Gallic Empire. It lasted from 260 to 274 AD. Postumus didn't try to march on Rome. He just wanted to defend his territories from Germanic invasions. He created his own government, minted his own coins, and ruled independently. In the east, the city of Palmyra in Syria became a power. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra conquered Egypt and much of the eastern provinces. She ruled an independent Palmyrene empire from 267 to 272 AD. At one point around 270 AD, the recognized Roman emperor controlled only Italy and parts of the Balkans. The rest of the empire was split into rival states. Fifth, the economy collapsed. The constant civil wars and invasions devastated the empire economically. Trade routes were disrupted. Cities were sacked. Fields were abandoned as farmers fled invasions. The government was desperate for money to pay the armies. But tax collection was difficult during chaos. Provinces that had broken away weren't paying taxes at all. So emperors debased the currency. They reduced the amount of silver in coins. A coin that was once mostly silver became mostly copper with just a thin coating of silver. This created massive inflation. Prices skyrocketed. A loaf of bread that cost 1 coin at the beginning of the century cost hundreds of coins by the end. When money becomes worthless, economies break down. People stopped using coins. They went back to barter, trading goods directly. The sophisticated Roman economy regressed. Sixth, plague struck. In the 250s and 260s, a terrible epidemic swept through the empire. It's called the Plague of Cyprian after a bishop who described it. We don't know exactly what disease it was. Possibly measles or smallpox. But it killed huge numbers of people. Thousands died daily in Rome at the plague's peak. Cities were depopulated. Farms were abandoned. The army couldn't recruit enough soldiers. Some historians estimate that the plague killed up to 1/5 of the empire's population. That's 10 million people or more. The demographic catastrophe weakened the empire terribly. 7th, climate change made things worse. The 3rd century was a time of climate instability. There were droughts and floods. Harvests failed. Food became scarce. This contributed to economic problems and made it harder for the empire to feed its cities and armies. By 270 AD, the Roman Empire seemed to be dying. The center couldn't hold. Barbarians were conquering Roman territory. The economy had collapsed. The government was bankrupt. Different regions had broken away. Historians debate whether Rome almost fell during this period, or whether the empire was resilient enough to survive. But certainly, it was the worst crisis Rome had faced in centuries. Then came a series of strong military emperors who fought to save the empire. The first was Aurelian, who became emperor in 270 AD. Aurelian was a tough soldier from the Balkans. He was called Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. Aurelian defeated the Goths, who had invaded the Balkans. He abandoned the province of Dacia because it was too exposed to invasion. This was the first time Rome had voluntarily given up territory. Then Aurelian marched east and defeated Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. He captured her and destroyed Palmyra's power. The eastern provinces were reclaimed. Next, Aurelian marched west and defeated the Gallic Empire. He brought Gaul, Britain, and Spain back under central control. By 274 AD, Aurelian had reunited the empire. It was an extraordinary achievement. Aurelian also built new walls around Rome. These massive walls still stand today. They were 40 feet high in places and enclosed the entire city. The fact that Rome needed walls again showed how dangerous the world had become. But in 275 AD, Aurelian was assassinated by his own officers over a misunderstanding. The empire lost a capable leader just when it needed him most. After Aurelian came several short-lived emperors. Then, in 284 AD, a general named Diocletian became emperor. Diocletian realized that one man couldn't effectively rule and defend the entire empire. It was too large. Crises happened simultaneously in different regions. An emperor in Italy couldn't respond quickly to an invasion in Syria or Britain. So Diocletian came up with a radical solution: divide the empire and share power. In 286 AD, Diocletian appointed a co-emperor named Maximian. Diocletian ruled the eastern half of the empire. Maximian ruled the western half. Both were equal emperors with the title Augustus. Then in 293 AD, Diocletian went further. Each Augustus appointed a junior emperor called a Caesar. The Caesars would help govern and lead armies. They would also be designated successors. This system is called the Tetrarchy, ruled by four men ruling the empire together. The empire was divided into 4 administrative regions. Each emperor had his own capital and armies. Diocletian ruled from Nicomedia in the east. Maximian ruled from Milan in Italy. The 2 Caesars ruled from other cities. Rome was no longer the capital. It had become just a ceremonial center. Real government happened elsewhere. This system had advantages. Military threats could be addressed quickly. Each region had an emperor nearby who could respond. The burden of ruling was shared. But it depended on cooperation. The 4 rulers had to work together and respect the arrangement. Diocletian also reformed the army. He increased its size significantly. He separated the mobile field armies from the frontier garrisons. This allowed for flexible response to invasions. He reformed the administration. He divided provinces into smaller units for better control. He created a massive bureaucracy with officials at every level. He reformed taxation. He instituted a new tax system based on regular assessments of land and population. Taxes were predictable and could be collected more efficiently. He tried to reform the economy. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, which set price controls on hundreds of goods and services. This was an attempt to stop inflation. The price controls didn't work. People just traded on the black market. But the edict shows how desperately the government wanted to stabilize the economy. Diocletian also persecuted Christians. He saw Christianity as a threat to Roman unity. In 303 AD, he launched the Great Persecution. Christian churches were destroyed. Christian scriptures were burned. Christians who refused to sacrifice to Roman gods were executed. This persecution was severe in the eastern provinces where Diocletian ruled. It was less severe in the west where Maximian was more tolerant. Thousands of Christians died, but Christianity continued to grow. In 305 AD, Diocletian did something extraordinary. He voluntarily retired. He abdicated and forced Maximian to abdicate as well. The 2 Caesars became the new Augusti and appointed new Caesars. Diocletian retired to a palace he had built in what is now split Croatia. He spent his final years gardening. When asked to return to power during later troubles, he reportedly said he would rather tend his cabbages. The Tetrarchy lasted about 20 years. But after Diocletian retired, the system broke down. The various emperors and Caesars began fighting each other. Another civil war erupted. Multiple men claimed imperial power. In 306 AD alone, there were 6 different people claiming to be emperor. Out of this chaos emerged Constantine. Constantine was the son of one of Diocletian's Caesars. He was proclaimed emperor by his father's soldiers in Britain in 306 AD. But Constantine had to fight to win control. It took him nearly 20 years and several civil wars. The decisive moment came in 312 AD. Constantine was marching on Rome to fight his rival Maxentius. Before the battle at the Milvian Bridge, just outside Rome, Constantine reportedly had a vision. According to Christian accounts, Constantine saw a cross of light in the sky with the words, "In this sign conquer." That night, he dreamed that Christ told him to mark his soldiers' shields with a Christian symbol. Constantine did so. In the battle, Constantine won decisively. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber River while fleeing. Constantine attributed his victory to the Christian God. He began to favor Christianity openly. In 313 AD, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan. This granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. Christians could worship freely. Their property would be returned. This was revolutionary. For the first time, Christianity was legal and protected. Constantine went further. He favored Christianity actively. He exempted Christian clergy from taxes. He gave the church money and land. He built magnificent churches, including Old St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Constantine himself gradually converted to Christianity, though he wasn't baptized until his deathbed in 337 AD. In 325 AD, Constantine called the Council of Nicaea. This was a gathering of bishops from across the empire. Its purpose was to resolve theological disputes, particularly about the nature of Christ. The council produced the Nicene Creed, which defined Orthodox Christian belief. Constantine used Christianity to unify the empire ideologically. But Constantine did more than promote Christianity. He also founded a new capital. In 330 AD, Constantine inaugurated a new city on the site of the ancient Greek town of Byzantium. He called it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Today it's Istanbul. Constantinople was strategically located. It sat on the Bosporus Strait, controlling the passage between Europe and Asia. It was near the wealthy eastern provinces. It was defensible, surrounded by water on three sides. Constantine built Constantinople as a Christian capital. It had churches, not pagan temples. It was the new Rome, but better positioned and more Christian than the old Rome. The founding of Constantinople symbolized how the empire was changing. The center of power was shifting east. Christianity was replacing paganism. The Roman Empire was transforming into something new.